and you are listening to The Adam Messer Show. I'm your host, Adam Messer, and you are listening to us here on WRUULP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul, and we're at the top of the hour here, so Sebastian, you want to play some more?
Yeah.
All right, so he wrapped up the last hour, but I'd like to have you start off this first hour. That's the top of the hour. All right, so here's Sebastian Messer, everybody. Thanks a lot, Bess. Okay, so we are the first hour. We were talking with Ryan Dunn and Allan Gunnels, and Mark has a new book called 324 Abercorn. It's a book about an author who moves to Savannah and come to find out the house is haunted. And so it's a really good book. I'm halfway through it myself. And Ryan is the owner, like with his wife, Kim Dunn, of Afterlife Tours. And he's done he's got a couple books himself. So welcome back, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. So we were talking right before the end of the hour. We were talking about this. At least I know I was kind of sharing my opinion about how I feel. There's so much hyper awareness, or so much like information that we're kind of inundated with, on a daily basis. If you're active on social media and stuff like that, and it's kind of hard not to be active on social media and all. And but it's really nice to be able to take a step back and read a book. Like we picked up when we were at the comic book store. We picked up what was it, issue 296 and 298 of Heavy Metal magazine. And I love reading comics, and I read a lot of other stuff too. But man, I was like, primarily the last 20 something years or so, I have been mostly a non-fiction reader. I like to read books on leadership and self-development and things like that. It's only been like the last 2 years or so that I've kind of gotten back into reading fiction, because going through school, doing business, stuff like that, constantly trying to read about leadership trends and business development and stuff like that. And I have to say, my favorite thing with any storytelling device, and any of the best storytelling people, folks that are like non-fiction, fiction, whatever, storytelling is storytelling. Doesn't really matter if you're telling fiction or non-fiction or whatever. It always comes back, in my, and this is my opinion also, the caveat here, but it always comes back to the human condition. Every one of them, for me, it always comes back to the human condition. So like there's a guy named Malcolm Gladwell. He's a very famous author, and I love listening to his audiobooks, because the way that he kind of does the same thing like you do, Ryan, where he does a lot of digging and a lot of research, and he pulls all these different things together, and he makes these connections. Like, okay, well, this is, somebody maybe didn't look at this before or whatever, right?
Right.
And I love, that is one of the things I love about storytelling is, when you feel like you're a part of the story, like we were talking last hour, when you feel like, you're the guy carrying up the groceries on the stairs and your oranges all fall out, or kind of feeling lost because you're in a different city or whatever. When you can identify with that, or you can visualize the person, like in nonfiction, if you can visualize the person that they're talking about, and you can identify and see them, as a true person, or like even with fictional characters, if you can identify with the personality or the imaginary person, if you can connect with those human conditions, the feelings, the emotions, the thoughts, I feel like that's those are some of the most important elements of storytelling. And as a reader, I appreciate that. And as a writer, I try to do that too. Like even with the newspaper stuff, I've always I write about events. I like to call it popcorn because it's light and fluffy, and I don't write about heartbeat stuff, but I always try to write about the people behind the events. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
I de-
what's y'all's take on storytelling? How do you feel about it?
I definitely agree with what you were saying there. I mean, sometimes as a reader, when I'm reading something, it's nice to have that moment with the character where you're like, I know how that feels.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I recognize that moment. And, like, for me, that isn't always just with the, like, heroic characters, because we all have a little good and bad in us. And sometimes even, I feel like the best villains are the ones whose motivations are clear.
Right.
And you might not condone what they're doing, but you at least understand their thinking. And every now and again, sometimes I might have to admit, like, maybe not to that extreme degree, but I know what that feels like too. I know what that anger feels like. I just handle it in a more productive way than this person is. But yeah, so I definitely feel that way about writing. I want people to be able to look at my characters and say, I know who that person is, or I know how that feels.
Yeah, like you can identify with them, you can empathize with them.
Yeah, definitely.
What about you, Ryan?
Yeah, I definitely think being empathizing with them and being able to get involved with the characters makes it a lot easier. And also a lot. I guess everybody has their own styles of what they like. One of my favorite things about Mark's style of writing is the fact that, I mean, very descriptive, but not overly descriptive. He doesn't spend 10 pages describing what the character's wearing to where he
Mm-hmm.
loses you in the book, but he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't just work past it to where you don't get involved with the character. It's like just the right amount of what you need to enjoy the story, which is awesome and very descriptive. And just, I don't know, some of his similes and stuff and some of his writing is just awesome. So I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think too is important. Is like you have to have enough to kind of set the framework, with the description. But I don't, that actually was so crazy. But that first novella that I put out, that was one of the things I didn't really describe my characters, except for there was one scene where the girl Anna, she's a vampire, and she tells the guy Johnny, she's like, I want you to see me for who I am. I really am. That was the only scene that I had where just described like her alabaster skin and her pitch black eyes and seeing the fangs and stuff like that of being a vampire. Other than that, I didn't describe what any of the characters look like, and because I wanted to leave it up to the reader's imagination. And I had one person kind of tell me like, I really wanted more character description. So that's just something, some people, like I like to kind of imagine more of myself, like, okay, whatever. But I do see the importance of having, like some structure. So I started incorporating that in my writing as well. And that's one of the things I think, as a writer, you kind of grow as you go. You know what I mean? You kind of learn as you go.
I feel like the older I get, the less I describe my characters. I feel like
you and I had this conversation about this too. we had a long conversation about the same thing, about like not describing our characters. So what's your impetus for not wanting to? Because like you said, as you get older, what do you mean?
I guess I feel as I get older, I feel like I really only want to put what's important, and sometimes what a character looks like isn't that important. And I look at some of my old stuff from like when I was a teenager, and it's like every character at one point stops and looks in the mirror so that I can fully describe what they look like. And I'm like, well, not only does that just stop the story, it's unimportant. And I'd like the idea that, you know, everybody who reads it can see a different person. It's the same person personality-wise, but physically they can make it who they want. Because unless something about their appearance is relevant to the story, I usually leave it out, to the point where I don't even necessarily put race of characters.
Right.
It's not relevant. So just, you know, you know what's important about the person, which is what their personality is. And if their appearance isn't relevant to the story, then you can build that yourself in your imagination.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree on that. Like, for example, I've kind of, it's weird, but this year I had this idea for like a different like a sci-fi series, right? And so I started writing it, and I got to the point where I wanted it to be kind of like a lighthearted, funny, you know, sci-fi comedy. But as I was writing it, I was like, oh, wait a minute, this is a lot darker than I wanted to be. I had to stop because the characters, you know, not so much the physical description of them, but like their behavior, you know, describing like, you know, how they were acting, and like the characters were kind of like taking a mind of their own as I was writing, and so I had to like step back and say, hey, wait a minute, you know, is this, because one of them one of the characters that you know, she's an alien, and you know, I was like, okay, well, what would this alien species, you know, what would they be like, or what would, you know, this person be like, or whatever, right? And I just kind of I had to do a full stop. I had to step away from it because I felt like the writing, you know, with that story, and not so much describing their physical characteristics, you know, but really kind of just describing, you know, who they are and how they interact with other people and the conversations that they have, and you know, and I don't write with where it's like first person, you know, showing like that inner dialogue or whatever. I usually write from third person, omniscient, just kind of like I'm an observer, you know, of what's going on. But it's I agree. I mean, it's like, you know, some details, you know, if I was writing a movie script, I'd have to be more descriptive. I'd have to say, well, you know, she's wearing, you know, this gray top, and you know, it looks like this, and you know, you'd have to have really specific details, and like, you know, you'd have to know like this is what, you know, her head would look like, and this is how tall she would be, and so on. You know, but in a book, you know, it doesn't really translate as well, or doesn't necessarily have to. And I know some people, they're like, oh, I want to know every detail. You know, it's kind of like back in the 90s, there were like 10 different Spider-Man books. Like people wanted to know like every aspect of Spider-Man's life, you know?
Yeah.
And there's some readers that like that, you know, but I'm not one of those readers. I kind of like to, you know, kind of flow with the imagination. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And, you know, everybody does it differently, which is one of the great things about this profession is, you know, some people are very much into description and they can make that work. But for me, it's not something that interests me as much. I do like to give life beyond the story, in that I was talking about this recently online. Like, a little revelation I had about my process. Like, I might start a chapter and I know what the big thing is that needs to happen. Like, so-and-so has to get an important text.
Like plot line type stuff. Like point A to point B. They've got, like, you don't know what's going to happen in between, but you know where you want them to start, and you know where you want them to end, right?
Yeah, so then I have to decide, so where are they when they get the text? What are they doing? And maybe what they're doing has nothing to do with the plot, but that gives it life beyond just the story, to show that there's a bigger world happening than just the plot.
Well, that's what I was thinking too, like when I was talking about the writing, you know, and had to do like a full stop, because you do a lot of action description, like, you know, what they're doing, you know, showing instead of telling, you know, like you're talking about like what they're doing like for example, I keep talking about, I don't want to, ruin it, do any spoilers or anything like that, but I keep talking about dropping the oranges, like that scene just stuck out of my head. And, but it was like the actions there with him and the other character. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and because I do believe if everything action-wise that happens in the book only serves the plot, it can start to feel contrived. Like they're only chess pieces there to be moved around to forward the plot.
Yeah.
So I want them to have a little broader life beyond just the story I'm telling. I feel that helps with suspension of disbelief too. Like they feel more like real people with a real life, and this story just is one of the things happening to them.
Yeah, everybody loves the little behind the scenes and the little insider information. Kind of like, oh, like you're on the in, Everybody loves that.
Yeah.
It really feels like that with his books, and also your short stories are like that, which, if you haven't read any of Mark's short story fiction, it's also awesome. So your book Haven was really, really good. That came out not too long ago. It was awesome, too.
Thank you.
So here, let me do a station ID, everybody. You're listening to WRUULP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. And so we're talking, we've been kind of talking about writing and all that, and just, plot development, character development, that kind of stuff, or whatever. And you've got your new book coming out, Mark. It's called 324 Abercorn, and it's set here in Savannah. It's a horror story or a ghost story. And it's so weird. Okay, so last year I joined the Horror Writers Association, and so the thing is with horror is a genre that is kind of like romance. It covers a huge umbrella of different genres. I like horror comedy stuff like Shaun of the Dead, those kind of things. Some people, like ghost stories. Some people like zombie stories. Some people like vampire stuff. So, some people like sci-fi horror, and I think that's one of the appeals that I've always liked with that is I don't necessarily like the, the well, I call it the hack and slash, style horror. Some people, that's all they love,
Yeah.
I think the last time we were talking, Mark, I agree with you. I feel like you said that you like to kind of do more of a slow burn, with it, kind of like getting deep into, the character development, the plot development, and I feel like that's important, with storytelling, because we all kind of like that little lead up and that suspense, and especially when it has a good climax to the story. It's like boom, here we go, and you deliver on that, that premise. You're like boom, here you go. We've kind of been leading up to this point, and then doop, here you go. Here's your prize, for following along and playing along. What's something that you feel like, and Ryan, chime in on this too, please, for sure. But what's something that you feel like with storytelling that it helps you progress that plot, or it helps you progress that story, where you're not necessarily building up like fearful suspension, but kind of exciting, like, oh man, I'm kind of thrilled to see the next part. I'm kind of like sitting on the edge of my seat, like I can't wait to see the next part. How, what's something that you like to incorporate with your storytelling to kind of build up that anticipation?
Well, a lot of what I do is very instinctual on my part, and I think it's based also on the stories that I love as a reader or the movies I love as a viewer. Like the kind of pacing I like is the kind of pacing I try to create, and especially with this one, because my favorite ghost stories have very slow build-ups. The first, manifestations of the hauntings are always subtle, and it's not, just everything flying around the room. And I try to layer those in at a gradual pace that starts to escalate. I mean, to the point where I mentioned to Ryan, like, once the book is out, I kind of want to run a contest for people who read it to see if they can pinpoint the first odd occurrence in the house, because I feel like I made it so subtle that even my character doesn't notice it. I wonder if readers will pick up on it. But again, like, I do it at a gradually escalating pace because, you know, I want to give you enough that it's creepy, it's atmospheric, that you have plenty of time to get to know and care about the characters. And then as the story progresses, things just sort of ratchet up. And by then you're so invested in the people that it means more than if I had started out there before you got to know the characters.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about you, Ryan? How do you feel about it?
Well, I guess that's harder for me to answer. I guess with build up, so I guess I do it a little bit by writing, but mine's more, I guess, about what happened during our cases. So it's more, I guess, chronological more than anything. But it's interesting that Mark mentioned that about a lot of the haunted house stories. A lot of our investigations start out the same way. It's not usually right when we get there, things are going crazy.
Right.
It's usually a couple hours in after we've set up everything, and a lot of times when we're just sitting around waiting for something to happen and thinking nothing's going to happen, and we're about to fall asleep or exhausted, if something crazy happens and we're on the edge of our seat. So I guess with us it's more chronological, but it's interesting that in real life haunted cases it usually starts out subtle and works its way up. It's rare that it's just right away, very, very sudden. So.
If I can just say something about Ryan's writing is, as a fiction writer, I have a lot of respect for people who do nonfiction because I do not have a talent for that. Because in some ways, it's easier when you're just making it up to make it compelling and exciting. But when you're laying out the facts of what happened, I think Ryan has a real gift for laying it out in a way that is compelling, that is suspenseful, that does keep you interested. And, I think that is definitely a gift that some people have, and he has it.
I got a weird way of going about it. I basically just pour everything out I want into a story on paper, all the little tidbits that I want to put in the case and the story. And then after I go back and read it, it's all there, but it's a big mess. And then it's a matter of taking all that and cleaning it up and moving it around to where it just, I guess, without adding a lot of fluff, just enough, not fluff, I guess you'd say, but enough to make it smooth and readable and interesting. But at the same time, just, I guess, yeah, it's a matter of, to me, it's like a big jigsaw puzzle. You just dump it all out there and you have all the pieces. You just got to figure out how to put it all together and make it interesting to read.
Well,
so
yeah, it's a big difference between
static.
it's a big difference between like bullet points and reading a paragraph. Like when you do your investigations and you have all the different facts or whatever, you've got bullet points,
right.
And then you take, your I don't know, artistic liberty or whatever.
Yeah.
You take, you take your storytelling and you craft those facts into, something that's readable, because anybody could just do bullet points. Boom, 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 boom.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
There's a big difference between making it coherent though. Making it readable and because it doesn't matter, fiction or nonfiction, it all, you always have a beginning, a middle, and an end, no matter what. It's always a beginning and an end. I mean, a beginning, middle, and an end. With fiction versus nonfiction, it's the same thing. You start at one point and you're going to finish at another point. Nonfiction, it's more like a presentation and an interpretation of those facts, right?
Right.
Fiction, it is a presentation of the fictional facts, but also there's that purpose of kind of leading somebody to like they call them tropes or whatever, but you that you want, if you're going to watch a story about, like, let's just say fictional paranormal investigations going to a haunted house in a movie or whatever, you want to see certain things in that movie, that you want that ending to be kind of like, ooh, there's a twist there, there's something or whatever. Same thing with nonfiction. You know that there's something going on with this story, and you want to find out like what happened. It's like, okay, well, right. I don't know, I didn't know anything about James Stark. And then afterwards, after I saw the show, I was reading up about him, and the guy's name's Milnes. I can't remember.
No, Minus.
Minus.
M-I-N-I-S.
I was thinking it was like something like that, but I was reading up about these guys, and I'm like, wow, the true history behind these folks, is fascinating. I mean, because like Stark was kind of like a big blowhard, just he was,
Right.
more bark than bite, and the other guy was like not having it. He's like, no, and I felt,
Yep.
that's it's the same thing with any kind of storytelling. Like a good storyteller, kind of leads the reader through that process with like facilitates, not hand holding, but facilitates that story unraveling for them, like unfolding for them. And I feel like that's an important part of good storytelling. It's kind of like, you're going to present it, you're going to show it to people, but you're not going to handhold them. You're not going to say, well, this happened and then this happened and then this happened,
Right.
because that's boring. Nobody wants to hear a boring story, fiction or nonfiction. They just don't. Especially with everything today, we have such a short time to capture somebody's interest, and attention span. I mean, like I know for me, there's been, trying to read fiction the last couple of years, and I've been very supportive of indie authors. I've tried to, there's been quite a few books that I could not finish just because I couldn't follow along with the disjointed storytelling. And then there's other ones where I'm like reading, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to go to the next page. You know?
Yeah,
So,
I'm so weird about my reading too. I've got a select few that I love reading, and I still got outside my box and trying new stuff out. But I've still got like my, I guess, 9 or 10 go-to authors that
mm,
most of them I've read almost all their work. But there's a lot of, that if I get hooked on an author and I'm really into what they're doing, I end up binging them for a while too. So
you're what they call a whale reader. You'll like consume the whole like catalog of somebody's work, and that is so cool because like for me, I don't have any whale readers. I don't have anybody like that's read all my stuff. But
well, it's got to be. It definitely has to be somebody that, I mean, they have to have more than like 1 or 2 stories that I'm really,
mhm.
that I really dig, or books. I've had some people, I've read 2 or 3 of their books, and some are good and some are so. But if it's somebody that I really dig what they're doing, then yeah, I definitely go through their, like King. I've been through his whole catalog, and Anne Rice. But of course, I've always loved their work. So,
Yeah,
and
and
I'm going through Mark's catalog now. So
that's what I'm saying. I mean,
trying
like
to.
those, like actually, Ryan, you're the kind of reader that authors love because you get into the work and you're like you really like it and all that, and I think that's the cool thing. Me as a reader, I'm the same way. I'm like like when I was a kid, I used to read a lot of like Isaac Asimov and Piers Anthony. And I would read everything I could get my hands on of those two authors, especially like the Xanth novels. I love those Xanth novels or whatever. As an adult, I don't know. I really, I've kind of been trying to find my groove as far as reading fiction again. Like kind of just figuring out like what do I like because I'm not, I still like sci-fi, but I'm not so much into like reading. I picked up Dune. That's actually pretty good. I've been reading that, but you know. So, everybody, we're gonna do our mid break real quick here. You're listening to WRUULP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. Bass, do you want to play a little bit for us?
Yeah.
Okay, here's Sebastian, and then we're going to do the station ID stuff.
This is a message from the Georgia State Department of Public Health. Right now, federal and state guidelines recommend staying home if possible and limiting time in public places as precautions associated with social distancing. The more we use social distancing techniques, the more we reduce the risk of the virus spreading. This is especially important for older people and those with underlying health conditions who are most vulnerable to the virus. More information can be found at dph.georgia.gov. This is WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
How many times have you heard WRUU's corporate underwriting message? If you remember it, then your potential customers will remember your message as well. We are offering this space to connect corporate and institutional partners with our loyal and active listeners. Underwriting on WRUU is short, so listeners don't tune out. It's exclusive, so your message won't be lost in advertising clutter. And it supports Savannah's only community radio station. For a marketing package to increase your reach beyond traditional media, email underwriting at wruu.org.
All right, everybody, welcome back. This is the Adam Messer Show, and I am your host, Adam Messer. And my special guests today are Allan Gunnels, who is an author, and he's been talking about his new book, 324 Abercorn, which is set here in Savannah. It's about an author who moves to Savannah, and unbeknownst to him, he moves into a haunted house. And my other special guest today is Ryan Dunn, who he and his wife, Kim Dunn, own Afterlife Tours. And so this last half of the show, I'd like to, if you don't mind, y'all, I'd like to switch it up a little bit. And we've been talking mostly about your book and writing and stuff, Mark. And like this last half an hour, I'd like to kind of shift the focus to like the investigation stuff, Ryan. And like, talking about like how you got into, the paranormal investigations and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I guess ever since I was a little kid, I've had a passion for ghosts and true ghost stories and hauntings and pretty much anything creepy. I mean, I'm still a huge fan of horror films and horror fiction, so I guess it kind of fell right up my alley. But we moved to Savannah in 2010, me and my wife, because we love this city, and we decided we wanted to spend the rest of our lives here. And our kids were 2 and 4, so we wanted to get here before they started school and, get them in the school system here. And once we moved here, we had planned on opening a catering business. We've got a lot of restaurant background. And with Savannah being a big wedding destination and stuff, city, we thought it'd be great for caterings. But we still, we cater our own parties and stuff. But other than that, we haven't catered anything in 10 years. We've been doing investigations instead.
I have to say, you make a good burger too. Like,
oh, thanks, man.
Yeah,
appreciate it. Yeah, you came over for the cookout last year.
Yeah. I remember. It was like perfect.
Yeah, so we just moved here to open that, and we ended up moving into a haunted house. And because of our interest in this type of stuff, we were very curious about what was going on where we lived. And I've always been a believer, but I've also been very skeptical of what I'd seen because I'm a Taurus. I'm very stubborn. And unless I see it, I don't, I have trouble believing it, even though I want to. So I guess seeing it firsthand got me really excited, me and Kim, that this stuff is for real. And there are things we can't explain, and there are ghosts, and they were living in our house. So we started doing investigations, and now a little over 10 years later, it's a full-time business, and it's been awesome. We've, it's produced books, it's produced our tour companies, and now I get to study the dead for a living, which is fun. So.
And then also you get a chance to tell those stories too.
Yeah, and I feel like we're doing justice to these people. I mean, these are people that lived, and sadly enough, a lot of these ghost stories, whether it be on TV shows or on, ghost tours and throughout the U.S., people are telling a lot of BS. And I feel like these people lived and died, and their stories really need to be told truthfully. So,
yeah, that kind of brings up a point. And I know it sounds crazy, but they're real people. Like when people do tours of cemeteries and stuff like that, I'm like, these were real people. They might not have lived the same time we did, but they
Right.
were human beings. They were flesh and blood, just like us.
Yeah.
And I think it's so easy to disassociate. When it's a story, it's like, oh, yeah, it can never happen to me. Nobody ever believes anything can happen to them until it happens to them, right? But I think that's one of the interesting things, with connecting those stories, and the way you present the paranormal investigations of the historical aspects, not only of the people, but the building, the circumstances, the situation, the different, like even some of the social, economic, and political factors that were going on in the, at the time or during the incident or whatever.
And that has a lot to do with it. I mean, a lot of Savannah's history and a lot of the reason these places are haunted is what happened there. You have these cute little gift shops on River Street that were at one point for hundreds of years slave warehouses. And you have these hotels where people are now serving beer at a restaurant that was a yellow fever hospital. So, I mean, there were a lot of bad things that happened in our city, and it's definitely something we don't want to have covered up. We want to talk about the good and the bad in Savannah, but if they're going to come on a ghost tour, they're going to hear about the tragic history too, and that's what happened in our city, and that's who we are. And I'm glad Savannah's moved along and gotten better over the years, but there's still a long way to go. But that's something that needs to be remembered for sure, and we definitely want everyone's story told. So
yeah, I feel like that's important. Because like I said before, I feel like with your I keep calling it paranormal, but that's the only way I can really describe it. But you approach it from like the historical aspect. You approach it from the real people that were involved with it. Even with like your EVP and the other stuff, it's like, you just present like this is what we observed. This is what we captured on the electronic voice recording or whatever. And I don't feel like I've never felt like the different times that we talked, I've never felt like you tried to influence somebody on saying like one way or another, or try to convince somebody. And we talked about this before, but there are some folks, Savannah, one of the biggest industries in town is the tourism business, right? And some of the folks are not, I don't know. They're just they embellish a lot, right? They make.
I hear it all the time. It's really sad.
Yeah, I mean, like the stuff here in Savannah. There's so much interesting and fascinating stuff to me that you wouldn't have to make stuff up, because the truth was so, just had so many different facets to it. You could just tell that story, and it would be interesting enough. You know what I mean?
And I think that's what made us successful over the years, is just separating fact from fiction, and it's been fun because I've always enjoyed calling out fake stuff, and it's nice to be able to really come together and find out what's real, and it's very interesting to study it too. So
I'd like to see like a history book, like a modern history book, kind of reviewing Savannah from pre-colonial days to now. You know what I mean? Like the evolution of the area and the territory and the people, and like with the Gullah Geechee culture, that surrounds our area and the people that live here. It's just, to me, I find history fascinating.
I did too. I almost majored in history, but I never wanted to be a teacher. I don't think I love my kids, but I couldn't deal with the whole classroom full.
Yeah.
So the idea of having a history degree sounded great until I'm like, well, what would I do with it?
Yeah.
I just didn't know, so I just ended up I started out as majoring classical guitar, then business, then art, then business, and then never finished. But business was a good choice because I learned a lot with what we do. So
yeah, Mark, did you have some questions for Ryan that you want to ask about the paranormal stuff?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a fascinating subject for me because I guess I lean more toward the Scully than the Mulder, but I'm a very open-minded Scully, in that I can't say I believe just because I've never had a personal experience. But
wait a minute, hold on. I gotta stop you right there. You've never felt like you've had some kind of in your whole life? You never felt like you never even like had a relative that passed on and that you felt like they came to you in a dream or something like that? Because you know the reason I'm asking is because the way that you describe like your writing and that your descriptive writing, like you have, you know, I feel like you would have kind of like that next level of sensory perception. So that's what I'm asking.
You know, I can't pinpoint anything where I can really say I have, but I am fascinated by the subject, and I'm fascinated by compelling accounts from people who have. So when I hear those, it's not that I disbelieve them. It's just that I can't fully make that leap into saying, well, I believe if I haven't experienced it. And maybe on some level, I would like to, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do find this subject fascinating and compelling. And like I said, what drew me to Ryan's tours is that his is very, if he tells you something happened in this building, then he can back it up and that happened in that building. Which again, just like with fiction writing, you're laying the groundwork. You're saying, I'm telling you the truth here, so now go with me on this journey. But I guess my question is do you ever have any people on the tour who are the obnoxious kind of skeptic where they're giving pushback? And if so, like, how do you deal with that?
A troll.
I've had people that have been skeptic, and they've not said as much, or they've been more into the history side. But I had one time where this guy was just belligerent and was like, "Well, how do I know that you're not making it up, and that this, and how do I know what credentials do you have?" And I was trying to be very, I guess humble about it, nice. But finally, I just shut him up, and I was like, "Well, if you want me to, I'll email you the history of every single stop we're going by tonight, first thing tomorrow morning." And I said, I've got, hundreds of pages I could send you on these things, and I wouldn't have that typed up if it wasn't true. And I was like, as far as the paranormal side, we've done a lot of these national shows. I said, but also us being a member of the American Institute of Parapsychology definitely helps, give us credentials as far as scientific credentials, and doing stuff at Duke University. So I mentioned that, and he could kind of shut up. But at the same time, I don't think I changed. I didn't sway him as a believer, and I know I wouldn't. But at least the fact that we have credentials for what we do give us clout to where even if they don't believe us, I guess they respect the fact we have worked with colleges and things like that. And as opposed to just, which I do believe in psychics, but if I'm like, oh yeah, we just use psychics and things like that can't be validated, it doesn't really lend to our credibility. So. I guess affiliating us with a lot of different institutes and things like that, and a lot of different people in the field, definitely have helped build our credibility over the years. And a lot of people that are interested, that I find interesting, that are real religious, that don't believe in it, find it fascinating that we've had the church called out to help with cases, and that sways them a little bit sometimes too. Which I find it strange that some Christians don't believe in ghosts when Jesus himself, he came back from the dead, and ghosts are mentioned in the Bible several times. But so
as well as like demons and angels and a lot of
right. I've had Christians tell me
things.
they don't believe in demons, and I'm like, well, that's pretty much. That's all up in your book, And they're like, oh, they're not here anymore. I'm like, well, that's strange. But and to each their own. I don't bash anyone for their beliefs. But
it's not our place to judge. But it's kind of like if you're dealing with a skeptic. Like a person harassing you versus being a skeptical.
Yeah. And I love skeptics. I welcome skeptics. Because I enjoy, same thing with religion, though. I'm Christian. I enjoy having conversations with friends of mine that are Muslim and Buddhist. And I just I'm fascinated. I've always found religion a fascinating subject. So learning about different beliefs and the way different people worship around the world and their different belief systems, I find it just very interesting. And I used to love taking religion classes in college. It was always one of my favorites. So, but I think that ties with history too, because a lot of it goes back to history, and so that's also interesting.
That's a great question, Mark.
We're gonna be back at Moon River doing another overnight September 20th. If you guys want to join us, and I think there's still a few tickets left if any listeners want to come join us, but. Mark, if you and Craig want to come down for an overnight in September, we're doing it in October too. So, Adam, if you want to come out, it'll be a fun time.
We really talk about that sort of thing because like I said, we're fascinated by the subject, And I mean, we're constantly watching videos on that sort of thing online too. Like, so it's definitely a subject that interests us.
I think you'd have fun. It'd be fun for you to see it firsthand, maybe too.
Or you're doing the lock-in. What floor is that on? Are you going to be on the third floor again, or?
Oh, we're gonna have the whole building, the basement, the first, second, third, and fourth floors. And
I didn't
Sunday,
go on the
September
fourth
20th,
floor.
and then October 25th. We're doing 2 of them this fall.
When we were doing the shooting last, because you were in the morning and you did your interview and then you got to go. We were there like until I think like 10:30 or 11, like
Right.
doing the extras and all that stuff. And one of the floor, we did not go up on the fourth floor. I kind of peeked up there with like the stairwell that is there.
Right.
But I mean, yeah, Mark, I would, I know it sounds funny, but it is a creepy place. There's a lot. I mean, like literally, I was there to do a job. I was an actor, an extra actor. And when I say extra, it was kind of weird. It was a silent part. I didn't have lines, but I had to do a lot of acting of these characters, right? And that's how we did. Kind of like when they, these shows that they do the historical reenactment type stuff, and the characters like you've got like Ryan would be the interviewee doing the narration, and then they've got the scenes of the characters or whatever. That's what we were doing, and there was it was pretty creepy. I mean, like that place is, especially when it gets dark, it's very creepy.
Yeah.
Very spooky. Well, not. I mean, I don't know. I didn't feel uncomfortable because I was never by myself or anything like that. But I definitely would not want to be even the basement. Like the only floor there to me that felt kind of halfway normal.
The main one.
Yes.
Yeah, the rest of the building's weird. It's a weird building. I've had stuff run up behind me there. I've heard my name called out. It's actually one overnight a few years ago. I was walking in carrying in 2 equipment cases, and 2 of the people who bought tickets for the overnight are sitting at the bar drinking some water, and we're the only 3 people in the building. And I walked right past them, and I heard them say, "Hey, Ryan." So I turned around and I was like, "Oh, hey guys!" And right when I turned around to say, "Hey guys," like all the color left their face, and I was like, "Are you guys okay?" And they're like, "No." I said, "What just happened?" And they said, "We didn't say, 'Hey, Ryan.'" I said, "What do you mean?" They said that, "Hey, Ryan," they're like, "You heard it, right?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "That wasn't us." And so we had all heard somebody say, "Hey, Ryan," right when I walked in the door. There's no one there. So that was interesting.
That is, yeah. And, I'm kind of like on the skeptical side too. I just feel like that there's so much out in the universe that we don't know about. And like we were talking that one time, Ryan, it's kind of like since we're all a vibration of energy and matter can't be created or destroyed, what is it? What are we? When someone dies, where does that matter go? I mean, because we can't quantify.
Hang around,
Yeah, I mean, we can't quantify like our thoughts and our soul. We can't put like a measurement on that. So where does that energy go?
Yeah.
I mean, like our physical part, yeah, we can measure ounce for ounce, no big deal. I mean, but that's not what makes us. Our emotions, our thoughts, our our feelings. That's what I feel like makes us, and like how do you quantify that, and where does that go? So I don't know. It's interesting.
I find that the staunchest skeptics sometimes are reacting out of an extreme egotism. Like, if I don't understand it, it can't exist.
Right.
Yeah.
I've also met skeptics that like I'm an X-Files fan too. Like, you've seen the episodes where Scully clearly has an experience. There's no doubt something happened, and then later she's talking to Mulder and she's like, "Well, it could have been this," and getting abducted and things like that. And then she denies it. I've had skeptics where they've had stuff happen. I mean, right in front of them. Actually, the old owner of Moon River used to say he'd see a guy in a trench coat down the basement that would disappear, and he'd tell me these things. And then in the same sentence, he'd say, "But I don't believe in ghosts." I'm like, well, I don't know what else, you need to have happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he clearly tells me, I've seen this guy disappear. He's like, "There's no one else in the building. I'm here." And I'm like, "You've seen him with your own eyes?" "Yes, but I don't believe in ghosts." I'm like, well, then what? So I think some people, too, are in denial that have had, not like you, Mark, but people that have had experiences where they've had something and maybe it just scares them to want to accept it. But some people have had blatant experiences and then still don't want to buy into it. I think that's strange too.
Yeah, I agree. I'm like, but I like to also, approach things from a critical thought process and like, okay, well, I don't try to just rationalize things away, but also I don't try to exaggerate them either. Like I try to look at things for what they are. But there's a lot of stuff that I just don't know. I just don't know, and I feel like that's one of the things with you know even interpretations of history. It's like what happened is really a recording of the person who wrote it down. And
you're hearing two interpretations too.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
If there's a war, you read from both sides because, of course, both sides are going to have their they're going to favor their opinion and their side. So
yeah, because I'm sure if somebody were to ask about James Stark, like the Stark family might have been like, oh no, he was a great man, he was a saint,
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So it's depends. History's all dependent, but you got to take even with history with a grain of salt, depending on who was there and who was writing the account. That's why I love the accounts of like some of the old forts and things. It's from like a sergeant. And it's just straight up. It's old military. It's like, okay, so and so this time, such and such hour, and it's like just the facts. The way the news should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Some of those, but you start reading some of the old history books, and of course you hear opinion from both sides, and
yeah. Conjecture and interpretation and stuff like that. We've got like a few minutes left, y'all. Mark, where can folks check out your new book, 324 Abercorn? Where can they find out more information about it?
You can. It's already up for pre-order on Amazon.com. The ebook and the paperback are up there, and like I said, that'll be coming out July 8th. And like I said, I've been publishing a lot with Crystal Lake Publishing, so you can look up because they have a lot of great authors and a lot of great stuff. I think their site is crystallakepub.com. The book itself is already up for pre-order on Amazon, so I hope people check it out.
I'm excited to have you as one of the Valhalla Books authors coming up for our anthology too in the October 31st Halloween. So I'm pretty excited to have you on with that. It's gonna be a great. Your story is really awesome. So
I was happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, and Ryan, where can folks check out more stuff about like Afterlife tours?
Yeah, so after our website's afterlifetours.net to book for Savannah and for St. Augustine, and then any of my books you can find on Amazon as Afterlife 1 and 2.
That's pretty cool. And you said you're going to be doing a shut-in at Moon River in September and October?
Yeah, they can call the office for tickets for that at 912-398-7820. We're doing one Sunday, September 20th, and another one Sunday, October 25th. And that's going to be a 6-hour lock-in with access to all of our equipment and all the floors.
And on those, like, just real quick too, like you have people do a waiver, like they, if you've got health conditions and stuff like that, like you have them do a waiver and all that, right?
Oh yeah, you definitely have to sign a waiver. Especially with health conditions, I wouldn't recommend anything, if you have bad health conditions, just because even though it's going to be the fall, it's still going to be a little warm on the upper floors, and there's no AC up there.
No, there's not. It's still hot.
Water. Yeah, we'll have waters and stuff, and the basement's cold, so it won't be no AC in the building, but it'll definitely be warm in some areas. So.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the fact that you're doing everything that you can to be safe, and because we're still right in the middle of this pandemic, and also I appreciate that that you're doing that. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate y'all being here. Had a lot of fun talking with you about it, and congratulations, Mark, on your new book.
Thank you.
I wish you the best success with it. And Ryan, I'm really glad to hear. Congratulations, with especially being a small business owner. This pandemic has not been easy for anybody, but especially being a small business owner, I'm really happy to see that you and Kim, have been able to keep Afterlife Tours alive and moving forward, doing like really awesome stuff. So.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody. Stay tuned. And the Savannah at Night guys are